Welcome to What Not to Do. I'm Kyle Schmitz, and this is episode 1. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited you're here. And today I've got Ryan Hatch. He's an entrepreneur, product strategy consultant. We're going to talk failure. We're going to talk why failure. Why even talk about it? Stay tuned. Here we go. Man, I'm excited. We are sitting at Prohibition
Cigar bar.
We're smoking Fat Bottom Betties. We are sipping on Knob Creek smoked maple whiskey.
Syrup whiskey.
It's basically like maple syrup and whiskey. If we had pancakes, it'd be even better. I couldn't think of a better way to be able to, kick off the podcast, or just have a podcast. I mean, the setting for the conversation, all that kind of stuff is amazing. And if you guys don't know, I'm Kyle Schmitz, and I've got with me Ryan Hatch. Ryan, there's a specific reason why I wanted Ryan on the podcast today. He's built businesses, he's sold businesses, he helps advise major businesses on product innovation and strategy and execution. He is well acquainted with all things what not to do, and he also asks fantastic questions. And so he's going to help me kick off the introductory podcast. But Ryan, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kyle. It's an honor to be here with you.
Smoking sticks.
Fat
Bottom Betty.
I don't come here that often. This is my first time here,
yeah.
And I've never heard a cigar referred to as a stick. I like that.
Well, we can change that, right? We can get you here more often.
And what are we here to talk about today, Kyle? What is this podcast about?
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, why don't you tell our listeners just a bit more about who you are? I kind of covered it at high point, but who's Ryan?
Sure. So, my high-level story is I used to be a software engineer and used to write code. I wrote writing code when I was 12, and I was really curious about how things worked. But in college, I never wanted to be the one to just sit behind a desk and be a code monkey, right? Yeah. I was always interested in what's the intersection between business and tech, and that's driven me throughout my career path. And I had a failure first thing out of college. Is you just come out kind of like guns blazing, and we'll talk more about that in a different episode. But I had a failure early on, and it was really hard, and it's something that people don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
These are things that we talk about success, which is great. But this other side of the coin, on the failure side, and why, and how to deal with it, and what it can do for us.
All to think about it.
Yeah. Right. So a couple years after that, did another startup. We raised venture capital and grew that business. So I shifted into a product role, product management, and that was a big shift. Yeah. Into learning about the market and customers and how do we understand not just how do we build stuff, but what do we build, and so the company grew. We built that business. We grew. I shifted into a growth role, and then we sold that business, which has been great. And I've been doing corporate innovation, product strategy kind of stuff since.
Yep.
That we'll talk more about later, but. That's a little bit about me, but Kyle, this is your podcast.
It is my podcast.
And the listeners don't know anything about Kyle.
Nada. Scratch. I'm a stranger.
Who is Kyle? And what motivated you to want to start a podcast on failure?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a bit about me, born and raised in the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. I've moved to Minneapolis. I had a little stint in college there, moved back to Green Bay. A couple years later, moved back to Minneapolis, then moved back to Green Bay. Then I went down to Birmingham, Alabama. Then I went back to Green Bay, and then went back to Minneapolis for 8 years. Wow. And found a wife, started some babies, and that's a business in and of itself, right? And then we were back here in Green Bay, and we love the little bit slower pace of life, and it's great. In my life, I probably had more jobs than birthdays. And that's funny because it's true, right? And so, but grew up in life and didn't have clear direction. In high school, I did not really give regards to my studies. Really undervalued education and learning, which is kind of funny given who I am now. But I didn't. I thought I was going to be a rock star someday, and just kind of devalued stuff. Just squeaked by.
If you don't know Kyle, which you don't yet, but you're about to learn that he's a master musician and an incredibly talented guy. So you thought you were going to be a rock star.
I did, and that's very very gracious of you. But thought I was going to be a rock star. Squeaked by with a 3.1 in high school and didn't do anything. And if that's one thing, just looking back, a failure that I made was, in a sense, I gave up on myself. I really didn't give mind to my capacity and to really, but also not to have, didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted in life. And I think maybe a lot of people, even maybe who are listening, maybe you guys struggle with that too. You're not really sure where you're going in life, what you want out of life. And so I would kind of pinball my way, through life, zigging, zagging here, trying to figure it out, right? And I didn't have a coach, a teacher, a mentor in my life that was helping to give direction. I didn't know what I needed in that sense, And somewhere along the way, was never a reader and woke up one morning and said, I want to read a book. Maybe I thought it was kind of cool, like sitting in a coffee shop and sipping my espresso or whatever it is and reading a book, kind of but it birthed a love of reading in me and reignited this cavernous capacity for learning. And it's just amazing. Since then, it's the kind of the wildfire of intellectual curiosity has just taken me and really realized I've had so much to learn. And that has even stemmed through present day where, I'm running this podcast. I'm starting this podcast not because I have success. I'm actually still looking for that myself, right? Still clarifying and still working towards the things.
And aren't we all?
Right, exactly.
Because none of us are complete. Right? We all have more to do.
Yeah, exactly right. And so there's two major aims in this podcast. One, it's actually for me. I'm pretty selfish. I'm doing this because I want to learn. Right, and there are folks that have been in the trenches, but they've had success, and finding ways just to be able to learn and grow and learn from their examples, get to know them, and then see how I can apply those principles in my own life. Right, some things that growing up or even in my early adult years, I didn't have. But then also this podcast, even more so, is about you, the listener, because I imagine that I'm not the only one out of 7 billion people in the world. That are designed to learn, and they don't have someone they can learn from, right? I've heard it said, don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade places with, and wherever you might be on or at in your journey, are you taking advice from someone that you say, I want to be like them? And my hope is that as I interview entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures, that there are going to be those that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures in some capacity, some way, shape, or form. They're going to latch onto an episode and say, man, Ryan Hatch changed everything for me, right?
Kyle Schmitz
changed everything, whoever it might be, and be able to, in a sense, kind of broker that relationship for those who have had success and willing to pass on not just what to do, right, but what not to do.
Right.
And so that's kind of the...
And you had a great quote. It was... something about not making mistakes yourself, but learning from others. What was the quote?
Yeah. So it riffs off an old saying that goes, good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men learn from the mistakes of others. And so the idea is that as we aspire in life throughout our various ambitions, going after our calling or whatever our main goals in life are, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have failures, right? But necessarily because we are being ambitious and aspiring to build, to go after something, we are taking on more risk. All of life is risk, right? And so naturally we want to mitigate risk. One of the best ways to do that is to learn from the mistakes of others so we don't have to repeat them. Why? We're going to have enough of our own mistakes. We're going to have enough of our own failures. Right. Why commit the same mistakes and failures because of our own ignorance or because of our own unwillingness to have learned from others.
Yeah.
It's so huge.
If life is a minefield, right, you want to know where the clear path is, right? You want to follow in the footsteps of those who've made mistakes and avoid those, right, and learn from those.
That's exactly right. And then, I mean, even thinking through, so in my years of learning and reading and all that kind of stuff, guys like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, taught me a lot to think through this concept of mental models, right? And so, like, when we make a decision in life, we make millions in a day, right? We make them subconsciously. We make them out of habit. Other times we make really large decisions, like who we're going to marry, where we're going to study, what we're going to do, what that ultimate plan is, and then building out a strategy to execute that plan for our lives. Big things. And it can sometimes feel, in the land of the free, home of the brave, we have, we're sitting in the middle of an ocean, and we have all these options, 360 to be exact, right? Which way do we start swimming?
It's overwhelming.
And suddenly these options that were a symbol of freedom now become chains, right? And they can cause us to sink and drown in that ocean, right?
Yeah.
And so before we let that happen, before we let process analysis or indecision take us down, we start to think through various lenses or frameworks or vantage points or aspects, about the decision that we're trying to make, about the fork in the road, which way do we go, right? And one of those mental models, one of those lenses that I think is actually the best place to start is with what not to do. Why? Because when you're not sure what to do, start with what not to do. Start
narrow
there.
The field of view.
Exactly. It's not going to be the end all to the process, but it is the best place to start. And then through your other mental models, your other lenses, your other aspects, vantage points, you're going to be given all the necessary data, color it all in to be able to make the right decision.
Right.
I tell you what, I mean, these are just some lessons I've learned in my life, looking back on wrong decisions. And had I only been able to see the world like this, or had I seen it like this, or had I known this, or had someone just told me to do this, right? And so what I'm hoping to do is to help people swim, to help them start and be able to not drown, not be bound by this idea of unlimited options, but to consider the options and to start to put them on the path of developing a framework, how to think about the world, at least in one sense, from one vantage point, specifically what not to do, that will hopefully help them to mitigate risk, avoid failures, and help to equip them for success ultimately. And man, it's amazing. Sat down with some just neat folks. Everyone has a really cool story. And it's amazing, though, even bigger than that, how eager people are to share, how eager people are to want to talk about their failures, especially when what's on the line is helping someone else in their success.
Yeah.
And so for the folks listening and that will continue to listen, I'm just excited. Like I said, like the podcast is in a first sense about me because I want to learn.
Yeah.
Right. But even more than that, it's really about you, the listener. And I hope you guys walk away every episode in an increasing manner, equipped, affected, and pressed on in your journey for success.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about the audience, who do you see this podcast being a great fit for, and who's it not for? Like who do you think is the right fit for the kind of content you're going to have, the kind of people and stories you're going to be sharing? Who's the fit? Who's the audience?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's both narrow and broad, right? So the platform takes the stories of entrepreneurs, leaders, and public figures and gives them a place to share their failures, to equip others for success. So twofold. One, what do I mean by entrepreneurs, leaders, and public figures, right? Well, entrepreneur could be everyone from the big Fortune, 500 CEO, right, or founder, Silicon Valley tech startup guy, to the small mom and pop shop, here in Green Bay that's just trying to get underway, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the entrepreneur is only in his 20s, right? But he's building something, he's experienced failures and successes along the way, and he's willing to share those. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily only people that are, decades down the road for success. The people that could be sharing their failures and stories could also be folks that are younger than you.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to realize that we can learn from folks that are older than us and younger than us, or our peers. A leader could be someone that could be, in middle management. But then maybe they got a team of 10, 5, 10, 100 people that they're leading. They could be a thought leader in their respective industry. They could be someone who has a lot of expertise in their particular role but might not be, in a sense, leading anyone else, but they're a leader in their specific realm of expertise, right? It could also be someone like a pastor or in civil government, right? Someone that's leading a body of people. And then lastly, public figure. Could be an athlete, could be a celebrity, could be, again, civil government of some extent, could be an influencer. And if you'll notice, there's a little bit of overlap in each of these categories. Someone could be, one, two, or all three, right? Yeah. And oftentimes that is the case. But what's the common denominator, the scarlet thread with all these people, is that they have bigger ambitions, and they're striving to build something greater than themselves, right? Whether it's leading others, giving thought, equipping others. It's just amazing. They're looking to inspire others. They've moved from a point of, in a sense, success to significance, where they're wanting to take not only what they've succeeded in, but then parlay that into helping others become successful. So then, who is this for, as far as on the receiving end? You just flip the coin. It's for those that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures,
right?
And in that sense, and in all the same ways. And so it could be someone that says, like, maybe maybe you're an accountant in corporate America, and you're like, man, I've always had this idea of, like, instead of building someone else's dream, I want to kind of build my own, but I'm not really sure how to go about it. And I've thought about maybe opening up my own CPA firm or starting to do, contracting work or just kind of stuff off on the side. And they latch onto this, and they hear, someone that talks about starting their own business, maybe in a completely different industry, but it's that spark that they needed to go, right? Or maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, and you're like, I love what I do, love raising the kids, love nurturing them, and I also have, these skills, these passions, and what can I do, and how can I do this? Or you employ business principles to how you rule and manage the home, right? So in a sense, it's narrow and broad. I think because a lot of what's coming through are life principles in so many different ways that can apply to someone who isn't trying to build a Fortune 500 company. Right? They can benefit from that, but it equally applies to those who are. So, what do you think? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, totally.
It's narrow and broad in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that all of us are still aspiring towards something greater.
I hope.
Right? Whether that's something greater for our kids.
Yep.
Something greater for our career. Yep. Something greater in helping others.
Yeah.
Right? But all of that is fraught with uncertainty. All of that is fraught with challenges and risks. And that's what this is about.
Yeah.
I think about a friend of mine who hates his job. Right? Loves his family. Great dad. But he lives for home.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Right? And I think there's this, I see this like inkling within him to want to do more.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know, he's not equipped with how, right? And it's fear, right? Of stepping out, right? And we all struggle with that. And I think the great thing is to be able to hear stories of others who have gone and done that, right? And not unscathed.
Yeah.
Right? Because the hero's journey is fraught with challenges and risks. And what would a movie and a story be
yeah.
without those things?
Yeah.
And I think that so many stories that we hear in retrospect are sugar-coated. You know what I mean? And it's I think that narratives about success are really helpful, but they're also justifying, the decisions they made. It's not meant to really open up and talk about what really happened.
Right.
I think actually, from a society perspective, there are things that just aren't okay to talk about, like that fear of what would people think of me if I share this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. My wife and I, we had we miscarried a baby. We had twins coming, and we lost them, and we were so excited. And to go from like super high to super low. And the really interesting thing about that is no one wanted to acknowledge it. They wanted to cover it up and say, "Oh, you can have more," or like no one wanted to actually sit there in the pain with us.
Lean into it.
And I think there's other things socially that aren't, acceptable or to talk about. I think failure is one of those big things.
Yeah.
Right?
I think a lot of it has to do with pride. We want to generally look like we've got it all together, and that we've never made a mistake and that kind of stuff, because we care too much about what other people think of us, and that just kind of drives this vicious cycle of fear. We're afraid to do more because we're afraid of what people are going to think about us, and in the meantime, we're constantly covering up those failures because we care too much about what people are going to think about us if we tell about them. But the reality is, and this has actually came out in, you guys will hear this in another episode, but don't be afraid to not be okay, right? Like, it's okay to not be okay. Don't be afraid to say, I'm not okay, I need help, right? If it's reaching up, if it's a personal thing or a professional thing, it's okay to confess that. So at least you can leverage then that place of failure and say, if I continue on, press on my pride here, I'm just going to continue this path of destruction, right? Yeah. Whatever it might be. But I think sometimes pride can have a lot to do with it. We want to look like we have it all together. We want our Instagram face on, that type of thing. Right. Our Facebook face. And, I think this gives that platform for folks just over a cup of coffee, a beer, a cigar, whatever it might be, just to be, in a sense, lean into those failures. And that actually brings up another thing. You guys will hear some background noises. It's what I call Kyle style.
Kyle style.
I'm not interested in having in these conversations. There's other aspects of the podcast that'll be me in my little modest home studio hacking away and polishing things up. But this episode, it's really just face to face, in person, having that kind of conversation. Just like if you're sitting down with someone for the first time because you reached out to them and said, "Hey, I could see myself where you are. Would you help? Would you give me some counsel and advice?" And I really want, I guess the goal is that you guys would be drawn into that conversation. Maybe feel like you're here smoking a stogie with us or sipping on some Texas tea or something. So
yeah.
Hey, this is Kyle. Well done on your decision today to be great. Those are my kiddos in the background. Hey, if you want more of this kind of content, find me on social media. We'll keep the conversation going. You can hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, @StartWithWNTD. Again, @StartWithWNTD. We'll see you there.
So in the main segment of the podcast, I'm going to be asking three main questions to whoever it is that is sitting down with me. And it's going to be, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And if you could go back and do it over again, what would you do differently? Or another way to think about that question is going to be, if you're sitting down with someone for the first time that was saying like, "Hey, Ryan, I want to be where you are," how would you counsel them to go about things in a way to avoid the mistakes that you made? And so Ryan and I are kind of thinking, what if failure was a person, And as we kind of talk about this, we're thinking maybe failure's here having a stick with us, smoking with us and joking with us. And but we want to kind of take that question and say, okay, so like, what's the right way to think about failure? What does failure do right? Right? So Ryan, what do you think? I mean, what's the right way to think about failure? How do we approach it? What does failure do right for us?
Well, failure can, as a, like you said, a mentor, right? Failure can help us and teach us and guide us because maybe that path is like treacherous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually really good that I stopped here on the path. Because now I get to shift and move over to this other spot.
I got my face smashed for a reason.
Yeah.
Still a pulse, but
yeah, and on the flip side of that is when it's teaching me in that way,
yeah,
how do I respond?
Yep.
Do I look at myself and say, well, I'm not enough? Do I stop there?
Yeah.
Right? Or do I get back up, dust off the dirt, right? And there's a big social component here because failing privately is very differently than failing publicly. And maybe we can even talk about those two even separately.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about what is failure? What's good about failure publicly?
Yeah.
How does, and versus privately?
Yeah, well, I think the right way to think about failure is to think of it as a friend, to think of it as an advantage, to think of it as, like you said, a mentor, a teacher. It's training us to a greater place of maturity if we think about it and approach it that way, right? So thinking of it in that sense, it causes us to lean into it and to press in and start to take a look. Why did I get beat up? Why am I here? Why did this investment, bomb, right? Why do things go awry with my kids, or trying to raise these funds, or whatever it might be, whatever it is. I think failure is good because it brings us to a place of maturity, right? It's a point of testing, a point of battle, a point where we're being pressed, we're being beaten down, and it's not meant to keep us there. We're actually meant to conquer. We're meant to overcome. We're meant to win that fight, right? And I think Grant Cardone, Uncle G, if you're listening to this, which he probably is,
Uncle
right?
G.
I think he says in one of his books, I think 10X rule, you only failed if you quit, right? So it's interesting because I don't mean to dismiss the realities or the technicalities of failure, but I think you can have a macro failure and a micro failure.
Exactly.
Right.
And those are big. Those are very different.
Right. The macro failure is when you just give up and you stop. Right. The micro failure is when you hit that speed bump. Right. So you hit the speed bump as a micro failure, and the only way that you hit the macro failure is if you don't get back up and go over that speed bump. You just quit. You're done. You go home. Take your ball, pick up your ball, and go. Right. No. Right? We're meant to go through those things in life to teach us, to mature us, to make us stronger. I mean, this has been cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. It's exactly like lifting weights. You experience a progressive loading, right, of weight, and you don't go from benching 100 pounds to 300 pounds overnight.
Right.
But you add 5 pounds every workout, and guess what? In a matter of 3, 4, 5, 6 months, guess what you're benching?
Yeah.
300 pounds, right? Your muscles are being ripped and torn apart. They're failing, but intentionally so.
Getting stretched.
But it's making you stronger. And you'd never gone through that proverbial battle, that point of testing.
Yeah.
You would never grow into the source of maturity and strength that you could otherwise.
I like
so
that.
This is the way to lean into and to look at failure as a friend, as a mentor, as a coach, pushing you to go further than what you think you could.